I think they have to tell us. And by the way, of course, since there's no sessions after that, so we may have a little bit, elbow room if we need.
We have to go
drink.
aperitivo.
Yeah. Okay, have a seat, Matteo. Ci dice quando siamo. Quando siamo pronti e andiamo. Good afternoon, welcome everybody, and welcome to the many people who will be watching the streaming feed from Perugia. This is the panel on offshore journalism. My name is Mario Tedeschini-Lalli, and Nicola Kayser-Bril is here with me. We are a team of two who's involved in a new project which is called, as you can see on the slide, Offshore Journalism Toolkit, and which is being publicly launched in these very days, and about which you can learn more going online to the address offshorejournalism.com. And
sure.
Shall I? Oh, all right.
Sorry.
No. Oh, I mean, that's all right. This thing came about because there is a very, very specific case in Italy that somehow got my outrage. A very small news website in the central part of Italy, I mean, it's a newsroom of 4 people, was sued in court to delete 2 stories, 2 very, very local crime stories that were perfectly accurate, actually updated on the same page as events developed, but courts found against them and ordered the content to be deleted, affirming the so-called right to be forgotten, notwithstanding the official opinion of the Data Protection Agency in Italy that was against the removal of the content. All right? The court ignored the opinion, found against the website, ordered the content removed, and after a few years, because legal procedures in Italy tend to last quite long, they ordered the bit to be removed. So they removed the story, and since, in the meanwhile, another crime story was being challenged, they decided to remove the other one as well. I mean, this is a very small outfit. But the plaintiffs were not satisfied, and they asked for damages. And I want to just explain to you very, very rapidly what the story was about. I mean, the second one, which went all the way to the Supreme Court. The story was about a restaurant, the owner of the restaurant having a public brawl with some family members, with the public present, and one of these people took a knife out and stabbed another one. All right, so police was summoned, people were arrested, charges were filed, and a legal crime proceeding went on, and I think is still dragging on some courts somewhere, with going back and forth with appeals. Now, this notwithstanding, the Supreme Court in June 2016 found against the website, saying it's not enough that you actually deleted the stuff, but since you deleted it 6 months after you were asked to delete it, which was 2 years after the original story was published, 2 years in this case is time enough for a news story to survive. So we award damages for the 6 extra months that the story was published. So the car of the editor and publisher was impounded, and the brave friends of primadanoi.it appealed to European courts of human rights, which just a few days ago accepted to hear the case. So we will hear from them again in the next future. But this is so wild a thing for any journalist anywhere that I wrote a rant, actually, on a post, and Nicola read it, saying, well, why can't we do just what major companies do to optimize, so to say, minimize, actually, their fiscal contribution to society? Offshore their companies. Why can't we offshore our companies, or part of them, or our service, or whatever we need to do, in order to minimize the damage of removals and and maximize freedom of speech? Because when you get to the point where a court decides that news have an expiration date, and Italy is not alone here, I know that there are other jurisdictions in Europe, I think it's Bulgaria, Romania, I'm not sure, that we still have to check that are going along those lines. And I just heard, I forgot to tell you, this lawyer we were talking, I was talking to a few hours ago, who's an American media lawyer, tells me that for the first time in an American legislature, the New York legislature, a senator offered the bill to introduce the right to be forgotten in the U.S. Then it was killed, but it's the very first in the country of the First Amendment. So news have an expiration date. We think, but we can go move on. I think. Oh yeah, right. And the point is that it's not just the so-called right to be forgotten. There are a whole number of reasons and legal trappings that make journalism content disappear, or have the content removed by order of a court of a superior authority of the state. Okay, and we really believe that in the digital world, we can no longer define the action of publishing, especially of news publishing, as something that has to do only with its influence in the moment when the publish occurs. We do think that publishing across time is a feature of the digital universe, which are entitled to, because it gives us a new way of informing the public and being informed. So any limit on the time of our news, it's actually a limit on the freedom of expression and the freedom of what we used to call the press. We know that there may be problems for this. We know that some solutions to these problems have to be found, but we think they should be found within the articles of the freedom of the press and freedom of expression of the International Declaration of Human Rights, of course interpreted in the context of the digital universe. All right, yes, go ahead.
So, is this working? So yeah, as Mario said, based on this first example of Prima Danoi, we realized that there were different ways in which content was disappearing from the servers of European publishers. Another example that we found, for instance, was in France, where the police is free to censor any website they want. A piece of legislation was passed a few years ago that lets the police decide that an article has to be removed. Obviously, it's about terrorism and child porn, but the way in which it is used is much wider than that. And the way it works is as follows. So the police finds an article online that they want removed because it's terrorism. So what they have to do by law is contact the owner of the website or the editor of the website and ask for the article to be removed. And if within 24 hours the owner of the website has not taken action, then the police can ask the internet service providers to block access to the website. And what's really interesting is that the police never calls because they don't have the time to find the owner of the website. So what they do is they simply send a list of domains to block to the ISPs who do block that. And in France, there is one case of a news website that was blocked by ISPs after the police asked. And this website, obviously, because it could not access its audience, ceased to publish, and all of its content is gone forever. And so what we researched is this French example, and we looked at Turkey, where cases of censorship are more famous. And what's really interesting is that in Turkey as in France, the law is exactly the same, and it's misused in exactly the same way. You might think that there would be an oversight body that would verify that the police doesn't do anything, doesn't do bad things. But the way it works, in France at least, we couldn't do this kind of research in Turkey, but in France, the police every year sends the list of articles that were censored to one person who has been cleared to review the list. And this one person can then ask the police to review the decision. But there is just one problem, because this one person is in France, where the websites that have been blocked cannot be accessed. So the person just has a list of blocked websites and has to decide if the blocking was legitimate or not. And obviously, they cannot do that if they cannot read, if they cannot have access to the material that was blocked. So yeah, it's another way content is disappearing in Europe. A third way by which content can disappear is lawyers sending cease and desist letters. So it's also something that came out of the research that we did in the last few months. We called a series of publishers in Europe, and many of them told us that they do receive cease and desist letters from lawyers asking for an article to be removed. And most of the publishers simply take a decision whether or not to remove the content. Somehow they don't have clear processes. They just say, yeah, they don't have guidelines. They simply they told us they were making very good decisions, but obviously we cannot verify that. We had one case of a publisher who produced a transparency report, but they stopped doing it because there was no interest in the issue. So based on these examples of how content is disappearing from the servers of European publishers, we are trying to find a way how this content could be saved. And we came up with some examples of people who've been doing that in the past. And hopefully, in a few weeks, we will have an answer of what can be done to fight against these threats. Mario?
At least in certain cases. And, the most egregious example, which is an extreme example of actual offshore journalism, is something done by this English program. I mean, English, air quotes. Read air quotes around English here. It's called Guide of Hoax. It's a political, kiss and tell, maverick kind of blog about parliamentarian politics in Britain. but is set up and managed and mostly written by a guy who used to be a hedge fund manager. And he was quite smart, and he organized the structure of the blog as an offshore company. So there is an offshore company in an offshore, one of these safe haven, tax safe haven, that is the publisher. Then the domain name is owned by another company in another country. Then the servers are in a third country, plus the man himself is a citizen of a fourth European country from where he either writes or commutes to London, which means that he could and actually did defy the injunctions, a few injunctions, which is a very typical English law way by which courts can order content to be either deleted or not published at all, and in some cases on major, let's say, political, economic stories like the Trafigura scandal in 2009, or in more, shall we say, gossipy kind of news like some Elton John's husband extramarital affair that was all the rage some time ago. And he actually wrote, come and serve us the court order in St. Kitts and Nevis. So this is really just, an extreme case. But, and it was built from the beginning. But we think that we can learn from other kind of extraterritoriality that already happened in the news. First, this is something again from England, an example that dates back, way back before the news websites. Photographers were asked by police to give them their films after demonstrations to look out for people who could have committed crimes. And journalists, photographers did not want to help police that way, for a number of reasons that we don't have to explain here. And so the National Union of Journalists organized with the International Federation of Journalists in Brussels to hand over the actual films and ownership of the films to the International Union in Brussels. So the journalists, the photographers were summoned to court, and they say they're not in our possession anymore. And that worked in that case. And then there's a very small example. It has nothing to do with censorship or anything. I was the editor at the beginning of 2000 years of an Italian language website of CNN. We had a newsroom in Atlanta, a newsroom in Rome, which followed different labor laws. So when the newsroom in Rome went on strike for the labor contract, of course, our very Italian friends in Atlanta did not. All right? So this is a very strange example of extraterritoriality. But very interesting examples are the Guardians. The Guardian got the WikiLeaks documents, and then after that got the Snowden NSA documents. And in order to be on the safe side, the then editor of the Guardian, Alan Rusbridger, pulled into the project the New York Times, and after that he told the story as calling up Bill Keller, then editor of the New York Times, saying, we have the thumb drive, you have the First Amendment, okay? Which was all very true, because at one point the British government asked the Guardian to destroy the hard disk with the NSA Snowden files, and after a while he decided to go with it. So a couple of people from MI5 went to the Guardian's headquarters with big hammers and actually smashed the hard disk in the airtight room where they were kept, while the editors said, well, of course, you know that we have a newsroom in New York, which is doing mostly our reporting, and we have copies there. But so in this case, it worked. But of course, the Guardian is institutionally and from an organizational point of view, a multinational, multi-jurisdiction, very large title. What has Prima da Noi or medium-sized publications have to do with that? And of course, Panama Papers, again, it was a huge collaboration project, international collaboration project, and all the documents were somewhere safe, so that, like in the Italian case, the partner of the project was the magazine L'Espresso, and the financial police went to the press and said, well, give us the documents. And they said, we don't have them. How comes you don't have them? Well, we have access to a server somewhere with a safe server with a password. Give us a password. Of course, they did not give the password, and so that was safe. And, oh, yes, I'm sorry. There's a very recent example, which is hopefully still going on. It was is it? Slightly down. I think it's pronounced Urgüz. It's a website in Turkish and German, published of Turkish news, published out of Berlin with the help of a German website, managed and by two important journalists, especially former editor of a major Turkish newspaper that was in prison and then briefly released, and he went to Germany. So this may look more like, you know, World War II, Radio London broadcasting to occupied France or occupied Italy, but you know, it's more also very much like the kind of reasoning we are doing.
Yes. So what we've tried to show so far, and I totally apologize for my being extremely tired, what we've shown so far is that content is disappearing from newsrooms in Europe. There are some examples of things that have been done to protect content, whether it's content before publication, as was the case with the Panama Papers, or content after publication, as this example that Mario was talking about photographers in the 90s. A final way by which content can be preserved would be the Internet archives. In this
you know, the Wayback Machine?
Yeah, the Wayback Machine, which you probably know. So you have examples of such archives. The problem with these, so the Internet archive, there is a similar project in Portugal, is that they only archive whatever is public. So if it's behind a paywall, it's not going to be archived. And they don't archive everything. They just archive whatever people tell them to archive. So you don't have much. And you have other libraries that collect everything. And that's the case of the Danish library, for instance. But the problem in this case is that because they have everything, some of the contents they might have in their collection can be private data. So they consider that everything they have is sensitive, which means that no one can access the Danish archive. You need to be a professional researcher to access the Danish archive. So it's for our purpose of trying to see what can be done to preserve content from being deleted so that content remain accessible, it's not a solution. So what we tried to do in the last 25 minutes was to show how content was disappearing and how it can be saved. And it might look like it's a fringe issue, and that we're talking about, yeah, maybe 10, 15 articles that are deleted every month, and why should we care? And it's what the publishers that we've contacted thought, what they think. Most of them do not consider the problem seriously. But maybe the final point I'll try to make is that it's everything but a small issue. Imagine that in 10 years your next president has deleted all the articles about what he had been doing in the past 30 years. That's something that could definitely happen. What then? I mean, if there is no archive on the next generation of politicians, historians or journalists would have nothing to keep them accountable. And another problem that is massive is that whenever a news website goes down now, it's not archived, so everything is lost. And there are several examples of websites that have entirely disappeared without being archived at all. It's the case of Diário Digital, which used to be the biggest newsroom in Portugal, the biggest online newsroom in Portugal. It was like the #1 website from 1996 until last year. It was killed by the owner. So if you go to the URL now, you have nothing, and there is no archive at all. Some articles have been preserved in the Internet Archive or on archivo.pt, but most of it is lost forever. It's the same thing with Zaman, which was one of the main dailies in Turkey. It was closed down by the government last year, and here again, there is no archive at all, which means that a huge chunk of the cultural history of Portugal and Turkey has disappeared and will never be accessible again. So the idea of preserving content is something that should be taken seriously. We will continue in the next month to research how it can be done efficiently and how we can convince publishers that it is an important issue that they should consider. If you want to be alerted when we publish our findings, you can sign up on offshorejournalism.com. Give us your email and yes. Oh, yeah. Give us your email and we'll send you our report when it's done. And yeah, now we would love to know your thoughts about the issue.
Yes, perhaps we should just add from a formal point of view, which is not just formal, the fact that this project is being funded by Google's Digital News Initiative, and so we will, as Nicolas was saying, we're working on a report. Some of the material you can already find on the website, which is just a work in progress. And hopefully we will have a more structured report in some weeks. And then from what we will have found, we hope to go ahead and perhaps offer some or at least one possible solution for at least a couple of the problems that we showed today. So we'd be glad to talk to this very kind people who have come to listen to us, and what do you have any thoughts about what we're doing? Any suggestions? Any, of course, questions and so on? Would you please wait for the mic, because again we are streaming the session, and anything should be recorded. Please. Please.
Or you can also come to us during aperitivo. It might be a much better setting to discuss.
Well, there. Thanks. You want to save everything, right? So we should be online forever.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask you guys. Perhaps I didn't follow this quite well enough, but you said you're gonna show us some of the examples how to do it in a couple of weeks, right? This is the actual how you're gonna do this idea, this offshore journalism thing. You're gonna show that to the public in a couple of weeks, if I understood correctly.
In some weeks, not
in some
a couple
weeks.
of weeks.
But could you share with us any like very draft idea or very first idea about how this might look like, so that we have some?
Yeah, I mean, we imagined several ways that content could be saved, but the problem that that I personally faced. So to prepare this first report, we interviewed something like 30 publishers or journalists, and what was most interesting is that they don't care at all about the issue. We called publishers in countries where there is a high risk of rapid political change. I'm talking about Austria, where there was an election a few months ago where the far right could have been elected. I'm talking about France, where it's possible that the far right comes to power. And as I said previously, France has a legislation which is exactly the same as Turkey. So it's very possible that in the case of Le Pen coming to power, newsrooms will be closed down. And the number of newsrooms that are preparing for this possibility in France is about 0. There might be one, but they would not confirm. So the ideas that we had first implied that publishers would have to do something. And the fact is they won't do anything. So we had to review our plans. And something that we were discussing at this conference, that someone gave us the idea, would be to push for standards as part of the what's the name?
Information architecture.
No, there is a set of standards that is being drafted, and the idea might be to add a meta tag to HTML pages that would indicate the perceived risk that a piece of content be removed, and with this meta tag, that a scraper could send it directly to the Internet Archive, for instance. And from a legal point of view, that would mean that if the journalist has to remove the content later on, it's not the journalist that would archive the content directly, so there would be no risk of judges saying, are you making fun of me? You're deleting the content here, but you saved it somewhere else. So that might be a cost-effective way. But if you have other ideas, we're happy to hear them.
We can share with you some of the thoughts we've been working on. Like from, of course, we've been talking to lawyers as well. I mean, this is very much legal thing, not just an editorial thing. And but one of the most interesting, well, first, one thing I'm playing with is the idea that perhaps instead of each publisher building some architecture that will allow their stuff to be saved, to be in a safe place, which can be done for medium to large organizations, but instead perhaps talk and discuss the possibility of a consortium of, let's say, first aid kind of thing, where major publishers, major titles, NGOs, associations may band together to help save content at risk. All right, so this is one of the ideas. And so I was talking with this friend of mine who's a journalist, and very much in the last few years in the thick of discussion about ethics of journalism. And he said, well, that's very interesting, but let's say that, of course, for liability purposes, we want to make journalists and publishers not liable, because otherwise, you would be fined or imprisoned for contempt of court, all right? So you have to make safe, not just for the content, but for editors and publishers. And to make editors and publishers not liable, they really have to hand out ownership of the content, like the photographers did in 1989, 1999 in England, okay? But it's easier with pictures. Now, imagine text articles. So there is this consortium, there's something, right? And you hand over ownership of your content at risk, your article which risks to be deleted. And so the police, or the judge, or court, whoever comes and say, do edit or delete this stuff. And say, no, I cannot do it. I mean, it's Nicholas stuff. Nicholas is the Bahamas, wherever. And so you cannot do anything with the material, and I cannot be held liable for contempt of court. But, you know, we journalists sometimes do make mistakes or write incomplete stories. So it may happen that you want to edit on our own because you want to correct something or update something. Then if I put my stuff in a place where I cannot reach it anymore, which is the only real line of defense against any possible prosecution, then I won't be able to edit even if I want to edit, which gives you like a catch-22 legal architectural problem. So we're working on this. There is a possible solution to it. But anyway, this is just to show you the kind of reasoning we are looking for. We frankly hope that first the report, and especially whatever we come up with as a possible solution or solutions, may be good enough at least to start a conversation around this issue. Because as Nicolas was saying, you know, there are some publishers who just deny the existence of the problem, of the issue. Others do recognize it, but they don't seem to actually really care much about it. And so it's, if at least we would be able to raise the issue, and even if people would say, no, I mean, are you crazy? How can this work? And then we could say, well, let's see another way how we can work. Something? Come on, be brave. I know your Aperol Spritz, as Nicolas says, waiting for you, but all clear? Perhaps we can show the website. Are we online? Siamo collegati?
Sì.
Let's try. I mean, just. Just to show you.
Go to this website, give us your email, and
now you will find some stuff we already written, and most of this will probably be rewritten, pasted with a lot of more content and ideas that we are developing, and please do give us, especially people there on the internet, help us. I mean, not the two of us together.
Great. Well, thank you for being there, and enjoy the evening.
Removed. So they removed the story, and since in the meanwhile another crime story was being challenged, they decided to remove the other one as well. I mean, this is a very small outfit, but the plaintiffs were not satisfied, and they asked for damages. And I want to just explain to you very, very rapidly what the story was about. I mean, the second one, which went all the way to the Supreme Court. The story was about a restaurant, the owner of the restaurant having a public brawl with some family members, with the public present. The panel on offshore journalism. My name is Mario Tedeschini-Lalli, and Nicolas Kayser-Bril is here with me. We are a team of two who's involved in a new project, which is called, as you can see on the slide, Offshore Journalism Toolkit, and which is being publicly launched in these very days, and about which you can learn more going online to the address offshorejournalism.com. And
Sure.
shall I? Oh, all right. No, no. Oh, I mean, that's, all right. This thing came about because there is a very, very specific case in Italy that somehow got my outrage. A very small news website in the central part of Italy, I mean, it's a newsroom of 4 people, was sued in court to delete 2 stories, 2 very, very local crime stories that were perfectly accurate, actually updated on the same page. Well, I think they have to tell us. And by the way, of course, since there's no sessions after that, so we may have a little bit, elbow room if we need.
We have to go
Drink, yeah.
aperitivo.
Ok, have a seat, Matteo. Ci dice quando siamo pronti e andiamo. Good afternoon, welcome everybody, and welcome to the many people who will be watching the streaming feed from Perugia. This is as events developed, but courts found against them and ordered the content to be deleted, affirming the so-called right to be forgotten, notwithstanding the official opinion of the Data Protection Agency in Italy that was against the removal of the content. All right? The court ignored the opinion, found against the website, ordered the content removed, and after a few years, because legal procedures in Italy tend to last quite long, they ordered the bit to be